Hello everyone, I'm Yufei. Today I will talk about my research of cinematic choreography, remapping the narrative industrial urbanscape of Northeast China during the reform period. The presentation shows part of my MPhil dissertation in Cambridge last year. As suggested in the title, the research is centered around the three main discourses: city, cinema, and mapping. The modern urbanscape of Northeast China was established in line with the rest of the state-owned enterprises spread across a vast plain. Each industrial district was constructed as an independent urban system with its own residential, welfare, and cultural facilities. However, the adjustment of the planned economic policy forced the state-owned enterprises to undergo a process of reform in the late 1990s. The disbanded enterprise-oriented society pushed the once rigid factory-centered social system to the edge of dismantlement. The bureaucratic reform of the industrial districts raises the critical issue of how the image of the city is reflected in such enormous change. Whilst the changes to the physical hard urban fabric were easily visible, the soft narratives of the city is absent from planning maps, statistics, and propaganda. Alternatively, northeastern Chinese films in the past decade have captured the region in a bottom-up approach, by featuring the cinematic scenes in tandem with the transformation of the industrial urbanscape, and by focusing the lens clearly on the narratives of local inhabitants inside the changing districts. The rapid urban transformation is not only shifting the physical landscape, but also the site of one's experience, emotions, and memories. The changing city, often planned and mapped in quantitative rather than qualitative representations, reveals a discrepancy between the flattened urban mapping and an insider's experience of the social space. In this case, can cinema help to bridge the gaps in between the planned and real urbanscape by contributing to the sensible aspects? And how can we integrate the soft narratives and hard landscape to reflect a comprehensive city image? This research will introduce the concept of cinematic choreography in order to provide an alternative frame for viewing the industrial urbanscape under the reform. It will be applied as a method for qualitative regional representation that will lead us to combine spatial narratives with the geographical information of a particular place. Jonathan Reben argues in Soft City that although the urban landscape seems to be hard-edged, the elements of subjective experience and imagination of the inhabitants constitute the soft city, which is even more real than the hard one. The image of a multifaceted city, in the combination of the objective environment and the subjective interrelations, evokes discussions about its legibility, social practice, and associated sites of memories and experience. Film is often a dynamic representation of the city, embedding within itself the extended multi-dimensional spatial qualities. The 1920s City Symphony is a typical genre of urban film. In these scenes, the city is manipulated and recreated, linked by the movements of the actors and continuity editing. These segments of reality are analogous to the fragments of a topography. Together, they constitute the totality of the cinematic space. The chorographic potential of films is being explored by scholars in recent years, with the focuses ranged from mapping the film space towards using film as a means of measuring the real world. In my paper, I used the term choreography in cinematic mapping to emphasize the focus of a local detail depiction. Derived from Ptolemy's geography, chorography focuses its scope in regional representation. It portrays the identity of the place by emphasizing the subjective visionary points of the draftsman and the native scale of human interaction in a place. Both chorographic portraits and cinematic images do not necessarily lead to objectivity, but constitute the sense of places in a collage of descriptive and figurative components. The paper suggests a mapping scheme developing cinematic chorography in a layering method for analyzing urban phenomena. Focusing on a chosen film, the case study attempts to map the pictorial industrial district shown in the film images and builds up the cinematic choreography via four detail layers. They are the context of production, the fragments of the physical topography, the trajectory of the narrative film spatiality, and the site of collective memories. The research has proposed an urban cinematic ontology to analyze the visual elements. It is developed with reference to the ontology of domestic film space by the Cambridge Cinemuse Space Project by extending the scope of investigation to an urban level. The ontology is used as a coding system in doing qualitative visual analysis of the city in film. It covers both the hard facts of the urban fabrics, such as the context of built environment and the legibility of urban forms, and the soft elements, such as the intangible experience, activities, and memories. The ontology incorporates those urban components with an analytical methodology of visual materials in terms of the film's production, image, circulation, and audiencing. In this presentation, I shall focus my mapping on one film, The Piano in a Factory, to decode the narrative industrial urbanscape depicted within the screen images. The film is directed by Zhang Meng and screened in 2010. It is set in a post-industrial city in Northeast China. A laid-off worker, Chen Guilin, calls up a group of his former workmates in the abandoned steel factory to make a steel piano for his daughter. In Chinese, the word piano is written as steel instrument. The title and the storyline have already exhibited a strong association of this film with the industrial context. Without an indication of any specific time within the film narrative, it is believed that the story of the piano happened between 1998 and 2003, when hundreds of thousands of state-owned factories were shut, combined, or transformed from public to private ownership across China. During that period, Liaoning province in Northeast China suffered the most severe circumstances from the massive retrenchments. This is the place when Zhang Meng has lived his life and filmed this story. The director did not specify the city in film for the story to take place. He intended to show a story that can happen in any of the industrial towns in Northeast China. In the process of searching the filming locations, he aimed to match the real geography with a preset image of his childhood memories in the workers' village. In a typical industrial district, there are clubs, swimming pools, wineries, and large food markets that closely associated with the factories. You sense the burning smell at home all the time, and you could see smokestacks wherever you open the windows. Most of the scenes were filmed in the city of Anshan, as it still has a few abandoned factories remain. The filming sites become the raw material for building the ideal industrial urbanscape on screen. In exploring the fragments of the physical topography, the research starts with disassembling the scenes to identify a number of different places created in the film space. Through a fieldwork investigation, the research pinpoints 27 filming sites clustered in the real topography of Anshan City, among 35 different narrative places identified in the film. Hongtuo is the main filming site for the walking scenes. The site contributes to the most of the factory remnants shown in the film, such as the way station, the abandoned factory lands, the foundry for piano making, the passes in between the workshops, and the Hongtuo Workers' Club. The filming site of Qidashan Tang is identified through the building elements that appeared in the screen. The suburban streetscape of Qidashan resembles many everyday scenes in the film, such as the street view and the two restaurants, with one-story shanties and electric cables crumbling overhead. It is also the site for the scene of the former workers watching the demolition of the smokestacks in the film. The river marsh covered with reed bushes is Sha River. It is the place the main character went fishing. Nowadays, the environment along the river banks has changed drastically into a modern metropolis. Nonetheless, it is through the real bridges and the legible smokestacks remaining in the background that we identify the place as shown in the film. Another major site for the film is Anshan Steel Factory. It is the largest factory district in Anshan that occupies one-fourth of the central city area. The factory appears more of the living and transition scenes in the film. The director intends to show that the two means of working and living are inseparable in the industrial districts. Whenever Chen is on the road, there are industrial plants, smokestacks, and steel pipes busily filling up the background, constituting a typical northeastern scenery. Opposing the factory on the other side of the railway sits the main living area for workers. The filming sites in Tiedong residential complex can only be identified through visual similarities with the residential buildings in the film. It was difficult to tell the exact locations for filmmaking other than assuring the large scope, as many residential buildings were demolished and relocated over the past years, also due to the generic appearance of the building blocks across the whole district. The last key place is the water tower, situated on Duilushan. In the film, the tower is a recurring site visited by Chen and his father. After a collection of the urban fabrics, we can now move to the next layer, unfolding the narrative's spatial trajectory. The movements and dialogues in film narrative, referring to the notion of narrative space, links the above fragmented urban elements towards a spatial unity. The physical locations are linked through the characters' actions and rearranged according to the spatiality in the film's narrative. A creative geography of the film thus takes its shape, while this layer acts as strings that tie the urban fragments into a sequential narrative assemblage. I have picked 3 example passages for analysis. The main character, despite jumping over the real film locations far apart, moves through these places in cinematic urbanscape smoothly, weaving the fragments of the industrial city together. Part 1. After performing for a funeral under the cooling towers, Chen passed by the merchant town street and the warehouse by the railroad, finally arrived at the residential area to check out his daughter's piano lessons. However, as illustrated in the circle. To map his route in reality, the character would have finished his performance in the factory site, then ride on his motorbike from another corner of the city in Qidashan back to the railways and tunnels, finally made an U-turn to head outside of the factory site and enter the residential area. To arrange the urban fabrics according to the cinematic geography, the merchant town street in the film should be much closer to the city center, while the industrial railways and tunnel would sit between the street and the residential area. Part 2. A less erratic journey shows Chen taking his father back home. Chen is riding his father home from Deilushan Water Tower, passing the central factory street, which lies within a reasonable distance. But the contradiction still unveils to the real geography. They are going deeper into the factory site, which is the opposite direction to the location of Chen's home in the other part of the city. As such, the path implies that, in the cinematic geography, the water tower, factory street, and residential block are connected via an almost linear passage. The furious workers left the matter of piano making behind in the foundry, chasing the teenagers through the warehouse residues and factory railroads towards the workers' club. It is a particularly compelling trajectory, unites the two industrial filming sites into one, that uncovers the complete image of the working cluster within the narrative urbanscape. In this trip, the railroads in Part 1 appeared again at the same angle. The reappearance of the place creates a spatial continuity. It sets the character's scope of living and working to the same confined factory community complex within the whole film narrative. Through the process of unfolding and rearranging the narrative trajectories, these urban fragments are shuffled and restructured into a creative geography with respect to its narrative spatial arrangements. The fictional industrial district depicted in the film appears as a combination of the factory places, the living communities, and the topographies and infrastructures stretching in between. The film evokes a nostalgic sense of place in its gentle and humorous tone to deal with the harsh social paradigm shift. The liveliness and legacy of the working class culture extend the depths in both historical and spatial dimensions of the film geography, through an integrated combination of cultural elements and sites of memories. The death of the industrial age is repeatedly signified in association with elements of industrial landscape. For instance, the steaming cooling tower resembled the smoke from a cemetery scene, with a funeral set in front of the industrial landmarks. The Workers' Club is shown as the residue of socialist culture within the workers' community. Also, the destruction of the previous workers' apartments and the growing tree inside the abandoned warehouse enhance the sense of place that has been long forgotten. The most distinctive symbolized approach shown in the film is through the demolition of the two smokestacks. The process of preventing the demolition is the workers' last attempt to keep a sign of the industrial era. They try to propose new schemes to turn the smokestacks into a valuable landscape. However, the remark from the engineer in the film concludes the significance of the smokestacks as a site of memories. The film also seeks to emphasize the role of the Soviet Union as an elder brother for the industrialization of Northeast China. The Soviet influence is reflected through the aspects of education, building styles, and artifacts that appear in the everyday life in film. Music adds an additional cultural dimension to the cinematic geography within the film space. The film uses many songs by Russian and Eastern European bands that still capture the sense of working class. These songs are especially applied to the scenes depicting the workers' collective efforts such as piano making, looking for materials, or coming along for a fight. The accordion, a typical instrument for Russian music, appears as another token of memory under the Soviet influence. The research process is in a way a travelogue to take us through a journey transcending both space and time. Seeing and remapping the lost industrial landscape and the stories of the working class within the city remind us what has been left and what has been forgotten in one of the many tremendous changes of China in its contemporary urbanization. We bear witness again and again of those changing urbanscapes that we seek to record, revisit, and represent. The cinematic choreography possesses an archival capacity to retain the urban fabrics. Meanwhile, it elaborates the dynamic interrelations between people and place, city and culture, within the multi-layered complexity. Setting the current layered framework as a pilot study, the research awaits to be expanded to a more developed system in structuring the narrative cinematic landscapes.